Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com. So here's the scenario. He loves it. She doesn't. What are you gonna do? Let's find out on today's episode of The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone once again to The Buyer's Mind. I'm your host, Jeff Shore, taking you on this journey to understand the way that your customer makes decisions. And today's episode, I want to address a sticky problem, and that is what do we do when we have multiple decision makers? You know, the thing is, if we've only got one decision maker, then everything is much more simple, right? They've got their issues, they've got their needs, they've got their wants. We can explore that, we can figure it out. But if you have more than one decision maker, then you have more than one decision-making process. If we're not sensitive to that, if we don't get that, we're going to run into a problem. Joined as always by our show producer, Paul Murphy. Murph, I know you and Cynthia have to deal with this issue. Is it when you and your wife are shopping together for the same item, is it cooperative? Do you find yourself at odds from time to time?
Occasionally we find ourselves at odds, usually because as I'm looking in the checkbook, I have to decide whether or not there's enough money to purchase whatever it is we're looking at. But it's rare. We're usually on the same page.
But you do look at things differently, right? You have different ideas, different agendas, and even just different decision-making styles, right? For me, when I'm going shopping with Karen, I kind of want to be in and out as quickly as she can. She wants to make the right choice, so she's going to spend a lot of time investigating everything to make sure that she's making the best decision.
Yeah, there's always the joke about men are hunters, women are gatherers, and the guy goes in and kills what he's getting and gets out of the store right away.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but the stereotype seems to fit sometimes.
Well, that's true for me. I want to spend as little time in the store as I possibly can. So we see this with a buyer and a co-buyer, let's say a husband and wife or two people's shopping for a car or life insurance or whatever it is. But we also see it in the B2B world. So in that business-to-business environment, what do you do when you have multiple decision makers? If you're selling, say, a complex software security program to a large corporation. So before we hear from the legendary marketing mind of Matt Heinz, let's just share a few principles to keep in mind when you're dealing with multiple decision makers. And the first is that when you have multiple decision makers, it means that you have multiple decision-making equations. So one of the things that we teach at Shore Consulting is that people buy when their current dissatisfaction multiplied by their future promise is greater than their cost plus fear. That's a buying formula that I've been teaching for a very, very long time. But if you have different decision makers, then you have different equations. So, if I've got party A in the purchase decision, might have a current dissatisfaction. They're discontent with this over here. Party B is discontent with something completely different. Or what is attractive under future promise to party A is very different than party B. And then I add a party C in there and it changes everything all over again. So whenever I have multiple decision makers, I also have multiple decision-making equations. If we miss that, we're going to get into trouble because I'll be solving one person's problem, but not the other. And that means that in that sales process, I need to do my discovery to several different people. And if one of the decision makers is not in the room at the time, we have to be very quick to ask the question, what would he say? What would she say if she were sitting here right now? How would she answer that question? So at the very least, they are represented by proxy by somebody else in the room. So that's the first principle. Multiple decision makers equals multiple decision-making equations. The second principle is that you have to pay attention to the silent ones. Now, our natural tendency tendency is to pay attention to the over communicators, is to focus our attention and our eye contact and our answers on the person who is talking the most. That does not make that person the primary decision maker. And we will end up alienating them if we are not paying enough attention simply because they are not participating in the conversation as much as others. It's a very, very common issue. Oftentimes, the primary decision maker is sitting back and observing. So I just want to encourage you, if you've got more than one decision maker, spread the love, spread the eye contact, spread the questions. If you ask a question of one person and they answer, turn to the other and say, do you agree with that assessment? Does that make sense for you as well? We've got to pay attention to the silent decision makers. And then finally, principle number 3, emotion wins. So when you have a conflict amongst decision makers, follow the passion. The passionate person tends to carry the day. So if you can think about it, if you can follow that, now your goal is to help the emotional, passionate person win without making the other person feel like a loser. But understand, at the end of the day, the person who is most passionate tends to win the decision. And so now what we'll do is we'll hear from the legendary marketing mind of Matt Heinz to get a deeper sense of how this works, of how we sell to multiple decision makers. Well, we're thrilled to have on the podcast now Matt Heinz with Heinz Marketing. Matt is a prolific author, an award-winning blogger, and the president and founder of Heinz Marketing, HEINZ marketing.com, and is just a very, very influential business thinker and a really, really good guy from the Pacific Northwest. Please welcome Matt Heinz. Matt, how you doing?
I'm great, Jeff. Thanks very much for having me.
Hey, Matt, how did you get involved in the whole sales and marketing thing? Take us back to the early part of your career. Was it intentional? Did you stumble into it? How did you get connected in sales and marketing?
Oh, no, this has all been a giant mistake. I was supposed to, I played the piano competitively in high school. So I intended to, study music at University of Washington, go Dogs. And I ended up studying journalism and political science instead. And so my first job out of school, I was a reporter for a local newspaper covering state government news from a local perspective. And long story short, I went from the newspaper to a PR agency to Microsoft for a while. And then that's when I started to narrow into sort of B2B sales and marketing. And I am a marketer. Like I'm a marketer who sometimes speaks, the sales language. And I think that, that's what a lot of marketers need today. But for about 7.5 years before I started this business, ran marketing inside of B2B organizations, really helping them sort of align sales and marketing. For the last 10 years, I've really been, focused on sort of really revenue-centric marketing strategies for our clients.
Can you talk a little bit about just your marketing approach in general? Because, it's kind of funny. I don't proclaim to be an expert on marketing. I can sort of find my way around the marketing world. But what I have found over time is that there are, for every 1,000 people out there in the business world, 968 believe that they're experts in marketing. I don't actually think that a lot of people say, yes, I'm an expert in sales. And so I kind of actually choose to be in that space where there's less competition. But this has got to be frustrating for you as a marketer, a very successful marketer. You've got a huge firm that does a big and really exciting work, but you've got to deal with people who think they know marketing. So what is it that separates true marketing from what everybody thinks marketing is?
Well, there's no one size fits all marketing, which I guess benefits the people that say they also know how to do marketing, right? Which is fine. I think, for our approach, and it's, there's a lot of flavors of what works. I prefer marketing to have revenue responsibility, and I don't care who you're marketing to. It can be, individual consumers. It could be large enterprises. I think the output of marketing has to have an impact on the metrics that the CFO cares about. Mm-hmm. I don't think, you can't buy a beer with clicks and likes and retweets and impressions and web traffic and the things that a lot of marketers focus on. So the marketing of more, which is just more web traffic, more visits, more people on my newsletter list, like that may be a nice leading indicator, but that alone is not going to, make the cash register ring. So I think our marketing tends to focus less on the creative and more, our marketing doesn't start with a creative brief. It starts with a spreadsheet. What's the number we're trying to hit? And then who are we selling to? And I think if you start with those two questions, no matter what market you're in, what number are we trying to hit? What does success look like from a revenue standpoint? And who is our target audience and what do they care about? I mean, your audience is not going to care about your story until you prove that you care about theirs first. So the better you understand them, what they care about, what their motivations are, the better you can tell your prospects. Don't ask them what keeps them up at night. Tell them what should be keeping them up at night. And that insight gives you clues to how you can drive interest and engagement and ultimately conversion with and from them.
There's an old adage in marketing that says only 10% of marketing works. The problem is nobody really knows which 10%. Do you adhere to that? Is that outdated at this point? Is there any truth to that adage?
It's not outdated, but it's changing. I think that, there's greater transparency in terms of what marketing is working. When you've got multiple touch points to try to achieve a particular sale, or there's technology in place that's making it easier to look across multiple touch points in a campaign and weight the impact of those in those touches. There's still plenty of transactions that are kind of they're very much transactional, right? Like I send an email, someone clicks, they buy it or they don't buy it. And so if you're selling a CD or selling sort of music, maybe that happens. But let's say you're selling insurance. Let's say you're selling a car. Let's say you're selling something that's a little more considered. Well, giving credit to wherever the lead came from may be just a part of the story. And unfortunately, a lot of marketers say, well, this lead came from this event or it came from this, search campaign or what have you. But being able to look across the entire body of work and look at the entire buying journey, I think you get a much richer idea of what worked and what didn't, not just what touched them, but which of those seemed to have the greatest impact. Definitely a more advanced way of looking at reporting, but also, creates a lot better visibility. And then over time, greater efficiency of your marketing as you pivot deeper into what actually is working.
I want to shift gears here and talk about something that I know you and I are both interested in. And I'll just back this all the way up. My son and his wife recently bought a car. They've got 2 kids, or my grandkids, and they were driving this SUV, and they had to make the decision, do we get a minivan? Right? It's something we all have to deal with in life if we are parents. Do I get a minivan? Am I willing to lay aside that former identity because now I'm going to be the driver of a minivan? And so what happened was, in this case, my daughter-in-law really thought it'd be convenient and good for the family to have a minivan. My son was resistant about getting a minivan. So you have multiple decision makers that both have a say in it. You've got to figure out how that's going to affect things. I don't know that there's a whole lot difference between that and an enterprise sale where I've got 5 people on a committee who are all going to weigh in. If you're in sales, you're going to have to deal with multiple decision makers. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's talk about how we do this, because I know this is something you have to do all the time, right? You have to look at it and say, who are the decision makers, and how do I balance a whole lot of agenda into the purchase decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about buying committees, and in B2B, you hear that topic a lot. We tend to think about big companies that have lots of decision makers and influencers and people that sit in meetings and decide what they're going to do and what their priorities are. Well, that's all true. But in almost every purchase decision, there is some type of a buying group. It may be a direct group. It may be that, we are buying a new car and we have 3 kids now and we have to decide what we're going to get. And that's a big considered purchase. And so, the husband or the wife may not go out and do that on their own. They may talk about it. And so there's your committee of 2. You may go out and you say, you know what, I'm actually going to buy this particular movie, or I'm going to buy this CD. And that may be something you do on your own, but you were influenced by people in your community, by people that like similar music, by people at your work or whatnot. So if you think about the reasons why we create preference, the reasons why we decide one thing over another, either from direct members of the people that we're buying it with, or from people in our community or our sphere of influence that have influenced our priorities or our decisions, those all count. And so I think when you build your personas, when you understand who the buyers are, it's never you can never do that in isolation. You have to take into account the people they're buying with, or the people that have influence over their thinking, their priorities, and their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do you do that? I mean, because if you've got, let's just break this down a little bit. If you've got multiple decision makers, typically you've got different agendas and different levels of authority. So what do you recommend in regards to trying to make everybody happy? And yet that there are some decision makers who are more prominent, more authoritative than other decision makers.
Well, the first answer is just don't buy the minivan. Like, there's no reason that you have to buy a mini. I have 3 kids, and so my wife has a Chevy Traverse, which is about as close to a minivan as we'll ever get. We call it an SUV.
Yeah.
But there's Cheerios smashed everywhere, but it's fine.
Right. Yeah.
When I bought a new car, I realized I had to have something that was going to be able to cart all our monkeys around.
Mm-hmm.
I just ended up getting a pickup with a full crew cab, and now we're done. Right? Everybody's happy. It's got more room in the back than my wife's car. So no, I think. I mean, in any circumstance, you've got the individuals, but then a lot of companies don't step back and say, well, how do they buy? Why do they buy? Like, how do they decide what to look for? And you kind of take that buying journey. And before people start looking for solutions or deciding what to buy, there's the decision to do something. There's a decision to make a change. So before you start looking at what car should we get, there's a reason why you need a new car. And what is it? Is it because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses? Is it because the old car broke down? Is it because you got a promotion and you no longer want to drive the jalopy to work every day? I mean, so, different people may have different sort of reasons for engaging on that. But the purpose of entering that buying journey may actually also give you clues into who and what drove that, who and what precipitated that. And that may help you understand who else has influence over that buyer as well. In any given buying journey, there's a couple stages before you look at solutions that I think are interesting. One is sort of this loosening of the status quo, right? There's whatever you're used to. Either I have the car that I have, or, I don't have this music today and I have not spent that $1 on iTunes. I mean, no matter how big or small, there's the status quo. There's a loosening of that, saying something changed in terms of my interest, my environment, my situation. And then eventually there's a commitment to change. I've committed to doing something differently. And maybe you move very quickly to, I've committed to buying that piece of music. Mm-hmm. You may not move as quickly to, I'm going to buy that minivan. But there's conditions that go into place before someone even enters an active buying cycle. And I think as clues to you as a seller, the better you can understand those motivations and those triggers, the more likely you can actually start to create preference and interest for your solution from those prospects right away.
When you are, you have a marketing company, there are times when you've had to put together proposals, oftentimes very large proposals to work with big organizations. And do you find yourself asking the question, okay, we're talking to 5 different people in the organization, which one matters most? Do you tend to ask that question, or would you rather not ask the question?
Well, I would never ask the company directly.
Yes, but you're asking yourself, right? You're asking yourself.
Yeah, no, I think there are always, there's a hierarchy of buyers, always, right? We did, when I was at Microsoft, we did a lot of work in, we did work in a home and mortgage category, and we did a lot of sort of persona development. And we found that in a household, women have really the most authority and influence over almost every purchase. I think there were 3 things we identified that the men tend to do to make decisions around. It literally was like beer, batteries, and tires were the 3 things that the men drove. Everything else, it was a group decision, but the wife, the female in the household was really the authority. So that was good to know, but she wasn't making those decisions in isolation. She was taking input from kids. She was taking input from her spouse. She was taking input from her friends, people in the neighborhood, people at school, whatever. So I think, knowing who the final decision maker is important, but you don't necessarily need to start there. Like, if a decision maker is just fine with the status quo, an influencer might be needed to really sort of challenge that status quo. That could be one of the children. It could be the spouse. So I think not understanding the dynamics within that buying committee is important. Another way to think about that, your job, once you understand the buying committee, once you understand the positive and negative connection between members of that buying committee, your job is to build consensus amongst them so that you increase velocity towards a positive decision and change.
Give us some how-tos. What do you do? Oftentimes there's a conflict between decision makers, and yet your role here as playing the role of counselor, essentially, is to build that consensus. What do you do to try it? What are some tangible steps you can take to try and build consensus?
Well, I think, you have to find common ground, right? You have to find things that they both find of interest. And sometimes the way to do that is if you've got a champion, let's say if you've got someone engaged, you're talking to, one of the kids, or you're talking to, that's probably a bad example, you're talking to one of the spouses and saying, well, this sounds interesting, but I have to get my wife on board. Okay. Well, and I know my wife doesn't like spending money and she thinks our car's just fine. So you have to find the reason why she is maybe going to be motivated. It's like, well, you just had another kid. Is she worried about safety? Any car that's built before, this time of this year, doesn't have the same safety things built in, so it doesn't sort of match where she might think it matches, right? Or the baby seat sort of connections aren't gonna be as compatible. I'm kind of making this up as I go, but if you oftentimes you can use whoever your initial champion is to get insight into the buying committee as well as the buying committee members to figure out how to make that connection and move forward.
Are you aiming though to look at it and say, all right, at the end of the day, how do I make everyone happy? Or are you just trying to say, how do I make everyone a little happy, and the major decision maker, how do I make her really happy?
There's a book I read once that said that, if successful sellers focus more on being memorable than agreeable. And I do think your buyers ideally have to choose a solution that is going to make them better, make them, help them move closer towards their goals and their interests and their passions. I don't think that means there has to be winners and losers. If I have to buy a new car, I may not be excited at all about spending a lot more money or going into debt if I take that car loan. But what is it that I am getting? If I'm going to make a commitment to change, why am I happy about the outcome? What about that outcome makes it worth it for me to go through that pain? Even if you really want a new car, there's pain associated with change, right? I mean, there's time you have to spend going through that process, and there's money you're going to have to spend that you're no longer going to have. But the outcome isn't just having a new car. It's my kids are safe. I'm keeping up with the Joneses. I've got a sweet ass truck now instead of what I was driving before, like whatever that was. So, and even, whether you're selling to a consumer or whether you're selling to a corporation, there are rational and irrational decisions and reasons why people buy. So I think, if you can understand sort of and help people paint a positive picture of the outcome of what it's going to be like to have that new whatever it is, or to have made that change, that's where you can sort of help increase that velocity.
I want to just go back and reset something here. Let's just riff on this for a little bit, because I love what you said, that you had read in a book somewhere, successful sellers focus more on being memorable than on being agreeable. And since you can't remember who that was from, we're just going to make that a Jeff Shore original by Thursday, and we'll go that way. But I love that concept. I really, really do. And it's something that I know you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in your work. It's not just a matter of getting somebody's attention, right? Sometimes when we think about what marketing is, we're going to get somebody's attention. Well, I guess I could set somebody on fire and that would get their attention, but I'm not quite sure that's the attention that I want. What do we do here to think about, and how does it change your strategy as a marketer to think more about being memorable than about being agreeable?
Well, I mentioned earlier the idea of, not really that your buyers don't care about your story until you prove that you care about theirs. And I think sometimes the way to demonstrate that you care and have an interest and have an understanding of their situation is to share information with them that causes the challenging of the status quo, right? That gets them to consider, understand, and maybe even quantify the cost of a problem that they did or didn't know that they have. And so by doing that, by introducing information that might actually change the status quo, you actually might be introducing friction into the conversation. My dad spent 35 years in sales. He was a relationship sales guy. The last thing he wanted to do was create any friction with his prospects. But if you're going to get someone to change, by definition, you are introducing friction and you're introducing some pain related, at least in part, to that change. But if you introduce an insight that helps someone realize their life will be better, could be better, if they made that change, that's how they get committed to that change. And it's not just you coming in with some quackery trying to get someone out of a couple bucks. It's you pointing out to someone that the path they thought they were on is not the path they are actually on, or you're saying the path they are on is actually an undesirable or unsafe path, and they need to make a change, right? So it's that insight or reframe of the problem that becomes a compelling reason why people pay attention, but also why they commit to change and commit to the process with you.
It was interesting. I remember years ago, my wife and I bought a washer dryer, and the salesman asked us, "Where is your laundry room?" I thought, well, that's a weird question, but we told him where it was. And as it turns out, it's just across the hallway from the master bedroom. And he said, oh, okay. All right. So noise insulation, we got to get something really quiet. Noise insulation is going to be huge for you. And I have to tell you, it never crossed our mind. We never even thought about it. But suddenly, by him bringing up a solution to a problem we didn't even know we had, it rearranged our I like to refer to it as the hierarchy of values. I had my values list that I carried in. He rearranged my hierarchy, and suddenly the things that I thought I needed to have were not nearly as important that I get as this solution, because it was, in fact. And immediately I went back and I thought, oh man, how many times have we heard, that washing machine out of balance banging around in the laundry room across from the master bedroom? Is that what you're talking about? That sort of thing?
It absolutely. That's a great example. I'll give you another one. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and we're a smallish company compared to a lot. And it was actually an Oracle small business sort of networking event, and one Oracle rep came up to me and said, "Hey, have you thought about buying some servers from Oracle for your business?" And I'm like, "No, I absolutely have not. I'm not interested. I don't want to buy more servers. That doesn't sound like something I need." So 20 minutes later, another rep came up to me and just asked me about my business. And I just started saying, we're growing and we're taking on some bigger clients, and it's really kind of an exciting time in our business. She says, "Oh, so bigger clients. So is there a difference in what they ask of you than the smaller clients?" And I'm like, "Yeah, well, they tend to be a little needy." But she says, "No." She said, "What we have found is when companies go upstream and start selling more to enterprise, those enterprise companies require more of you. They require higher insurance premiums. They require you to have more of your own sort of indemnification in place. They also require that the information you're managing for them is encrypted, is safe, is redundant, so that their stuff is safe as well. What are you using to keep your data safe?" Right. And so she introduced a concept to me that told me if I want to continue to sell to big companies, I probably shouldn't just keep my stuff on my C drive and on Dropbox anymore. I need something better than that. So that was another way of just sort of challenging my status quo, but introducing an insight that actually made me say, wow, I really should think about this. Mm-hmm. Now, whether or not I buy a data server and whether or not I buy it from Oracle is a different story. But that was a very smart way of teaching me something that got me interested in learning more.
There's something about the simplicity of that is right. That's what genius is, right? It's simple answers to complex problems, and there's something about the simplicity in that causes you to have that, of course, reaction to it. I had somebody who approached me recently about ghostwriting a book for me, and I've never used a ghostwriter before. But here's the question she asked. She said, "Jeff, it's just a very simple question. What do you have more of, money or time?" And I don't want to suggest that I'm rich or anything, but it was a no-brainer question. I definitely have more money than I have time. And she said, "Great. Well, that's what I do. I exchange money for time. If you have more of one than the other, that's how I work." And it was
a reframe. It is a reframe of the problem that you didn't think that you had.
Exactly.
Years ago, as we started growing, my HR consultant said, "I think it might be time for you to consider getting an admin, getting an assistant." And I said, "There's no way in hell I'm getting an assistant. Yeah. I am not that kind of guy. I can book my own travel. I can handle my own schedule. Thank you very much. I don't want to be that guy."
Yeah.
And she said, "Tell you what." It was a Monday morning. She said, "Tell you what, take a spreadsheet. If you do this for me, get a spreadsheet. And every time you do something that you clearly are capable of doing, but that someone could help you do, someone else could take off your plate so you could spend more time on other things, just write that down. And on Friday, we'll look at the spreadsheet and we'll figure out what's up." By Tuesday afternoon, it was very clear that I really should get some help. Yeah. Not because I couldn't do those things, but because I was in my head that just writing those things down made it very clear the opportunity cost of not focusing on more important things that could move my business forward. Yeah. So there's a lot. Sometimes the reframe comes in showing someone some trends, right? To say, "Hey, listen, there's, the market is changing, conditions are changing. And, with that increasing change, there will be a gap between winners and losers. Which side do you want to be on?" Sometimes it's by tailoring that insight to your situation that really brings it home and makes it more prescient for you to do something.
Yeah, so cool. If you're listening to this podcast right now, there's a huge opportunity here for you to look at it and say, how do you solve problems that your customer doesn't even know they have? That is so cool. Hey, Matt, before we let you off the podcast, we got to put you on the hot seat for a couple of minutes. Rapid fire questions, rapid fire answers. You ready?
Got it.
Here we go. Very first job was what?
I was a courtesy clerk for a family-owned grocery store.
Okay. When you were 10, you thought you would be what?
An aeronautical engineer.
At 10?
Well, I didn't know what it meant, but people were impressed when I said it, so I thought that was pretty good.
With your lisp, because you were missing teeth and everything else. I love it. Exactly. The most beautiful place you've ever stood?
Oh. I would say Cardiff by the Sea, north of San Diego, California.
Gorgeous. Any book that you have read that made a profound impact on your life?
Atlas Shrugged.
Love it. A movie you've seen multiple times, but you would gladly watch it again if it came on television?
Office Space.
And the name of your first celebrity crush?
Alyssa Milano.
You're off the hot seat. Matt Heinz, a great conversation. That was really, really fun. You're just such an interesting guy, and the world needs more of you. So thanks. It's a Matt Heinz, HeinzMarketing.com. We'll put that in the show notes. Follow him. Use him. He's a great speaker, too. If you got an event coming up, he's fantastic for that. Matt, thanks for being on The Buyer's Mind.
This is a lot of fun. Thanks for the opportunity.
So Murph, we obviously talk so much about sales here on the Buyer's Mind, but it's always interesting to get somebody who really understands marketing, isn't it?
It is. I was amazed at the whole idea of that women have the most authority over a purchase. That was very interesting.
We see that happen over and over again, and I think it's when you think about a purchase decision, so much of it is follow the passion. Follow who's more passionate.
That phrase, happy
and
wife,
I don't think
life.
Women win because they're women.
It's that phrase, happy wife, happy life.
Well, that's true. It's but I think there's also just the side of it that women win not because they're women, but because they do tend to be more passionate about purchase decisions. And, I tend to look at it from the perspective, if I'm traveling all week and I come home and I say, hey, Karen, you want to go get something to eat? You want to go down to Makuni and get sushi? And she might say, I will, if you really want to. But I really want to go to the Italian and get their cheese plate. Can you please? And she's going to win because she's more passionate. But if it was the flip side, if she said, hey, you want to go get the cheese plate down at the Italian place? If I turned and said, I'll do that if you want to, but I've been thinking all week long about Makuni. Can we please go to? She'd say yes. It's the passionate person that wins. And Murph, I've met your wife, and I clearly on the passion meter, I got to give it to her over you. Nothing personal.
No, absolutely. She is a passionate woman. I love her.
That's great. I love the idea, this whole concept that Matt Heinz brought up about solving problems that the customer doesn't know that they have. Murph, we've talked in the past about your penchant for all things technical. I'm sure you see that from time to time where you see a really, really great salesperson who's selling you a technical product, showing you things and solving problems that you didn't even know you had in the first place.
Yeah, there are lots of things, in the technical field that you think you know about. And a good salesperson, if they know what they're doing, can show me things that even I didn't know I needed. So that's important.
And that leads me to a suggested action item for you, our listeners right now, to spend a little time, and even to do it right now, asking yourself the question, what problems do my customers have that they don't even know that they have? And don't look at this from the perspective of your product. Look at it from the perspective of their life, because you get to see a whole lot of customers, and every customer goes through this process of determining what's really important. Well, they determine what's really important according to what's really bothering them. You've got this database of people that you work with on a regular basis that you can go back and you can say, okay, these are the things that tend to worry people or bother people the most. How do I attack those things? How do I work on those things? And when you can step in from that perspective, and it's not that you're going to walk in and just blurt that out at the beginning of your presentation, but what you'll find here is that you're going on very much like that guy who sold me the washer dryer. In his mind, he knew that noise insulation was very important if the washer dryer was in a central part of the home, if it was a place that was going to be noise sensitivity. So he knew that because he had dealt with it with his previous customers. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. What are some of those things that a customer may not be thinking of when they first walk through the door, and yet are going to be very important to their overall purchase decision? This is a great way to add tremendous value to your position, to your role, to be able to come alongside your customers as a counselor, as that person who's going to help them through this travail, through this ordeal, and just say, I got this, I got this. You know what's going to do? It's going to build confidence in you because they know, this guy's thinking about things, this lady's thinking about things that I'm not even thinking about. What a great position to be in. So I want to encourage you to spend a little time right now thinking through what are the problems that you can solve that your customer doesn't even know they have. Because, listen, at the end of the day, when you take that good a care of your own customers, you do something more than sell them a product. You know what you do? You know what you do. You change their world.